Title of the Dharma talk this morning is Don't Look Away. It's a way of talking about and working with one of the three poisons, which is ignorance. We have the passion of grasping, meddling with something, analyzing, fooling around with that, whatever that is, changing it, blaming this, blaming that, blaming something, passion. And then we have aggression, going to war with, fighting, accusing, threatening, destroying, and so on, and all the other variations that could happen there. And then the other one is ignorance, which is very simply could just look like this. It could be using something else to distract yourself from something that's uncomfortable to look at, something that's threatening to look at, something that's confusing to look at, something that could be in your environment, it could be something that's coming up in your consciousness. I would say don't avoid anything. And with that, also don't grasp it, accept it, don't throw it away, reject it, don't go to war with anything. Lots of ways of working with that, but it's kind of a triangle. And if you don't see one of them, probably not going to see the other two because they kind of cooperate there. So don't look away. When something occurs, if you want to do something to it, then receive it. And that doesn't involve too much effort particularly. If we're not practicing that on the cushion regularly, if we're not sitting down and doing what? Watching the way we distract ourselves, actually witnessing the way we switch gears, the way we go away from the very thing that is presenting itself. If it comes up in your consciousness, it is difficult or challenging or full of fear, it's a Dharma gate for you, probably. Which means if it's a Dharma gate and you're a practitioner and you're on this path and you're endeavoring to proceed on this path, understand the teachings of this path, make them your own, then whatever comes up is a Dharma gate. And you don't have to go through a Dharma gate. You just have to look at the door. Going through it, that's sneaky. On the other hand, and on the same hand, you might find the door swinging open, you might find yourself pounding on the door, you might find yourself having to pick the damn lock. It could turn up so many different ways for each person. So there's a hesitancy to set up some kind of standard. This is why it says in the, what is it, which sutra is it? Don't set up standards, it's in Sandokai. Is that correct? Yeah. You should know. Don't set up standards. Don't make rules. This doesn't mean don't have guidelines or don't have ways of doing things, but be very careful of setting up a standard which causes you, well, I've got a standard, so now I can just disregard that whole situation because anytime it comes up, I can just look at the standard. This is called a very sophisticated form of ignorance. It's not that we don't need forms. It's not that we don't need guidelines and structures. It just means that they aren't always going to work as something to just abide by. There are going to be times when those things move around. Now, society that we live in, because most people are like children, and the people who think they're not children and think they're adults, they set up rules for the rest of the people and have guidelines whereby you can't do this because of this law, you can't do this because of this law. So we work with laws. We're a nation of laws. How many times have you heard that? Ho-hum. It's just the truth. We're not in a position, we're not sophisticated, meant in a descriptive way, not in an interpretive way so much as we're not clear enough to be able to operate out of, don't set up standards. That teaching is for people who are training their mind and are endeavoring to see the fundamental truth for themselves. What is that fundamental truth? If you're here, you're probably studying Buddhism, or at least endeavoring to do that, whether you're officially a Buddhist, having received vows or something like that. Not that important. But if you're here, you want to work with this in a way that is the way in which the Buddha taught. And what did he say? Everything is dependently arisen. Reflect on that. Contemplate that. You can't find a separate thing anywhere. Separated, yes, but nothing is really separate. And when we try to control that situation so that we keep away the things we don't like and get the things we do like, it can be a very sophisticated form of materialism, spiritual, scientific, cultural, or otherwise. Getting what we want, getting what we think is appropriate. Quite often these days, when there's so much YouTube and everything else going on, you can hear there are people yelling stuff from all quarters. Some people are really, really intelligent, and they're still completely without the proverbial clue about that they're not a separate being. Don't look away. Don't evaluate anything. You don't need opinions. And if an opinion just shows up that about something and it's based on causes and conditions, then that opinion is probably not exactly an opinion. It's just part of the whole matrix of apparent separation. You know yourself if you have an opinion about something where you're using that to keep yourself from investigating something that's irritating to you or don't like. It could be just about another person. I don't like that person. I don't like the way they act. I don't like the way they think they're so great, or the way they manipulate others. I mean, just on and on and on. You can find people that fall in all those categories. So when I say don't look away, I'm not saying don't have an opinion in the sense of stop the opinion. I'm saying be aware. Don't look away from the way in which your opinions show up. Nothing lasts. If you try to get rid of something, it will last. If you try to accept something, it will last. If you try to kill something or destroy it, it's going to persist because it's dependently arisen, and everything that is apparently separate responds to anything else that is trying to be separate, that is trying to control. It's like the analogy I sometimes, or a metaphor I sometimes use when I'm trying to talk about control. You really don't have any control. You got a little bit of control, but compared to all the things you don't have control of, you got a little bit of control, and even that's undependable. Don't depend on anything. As I've sometimes said, the metaphor I was thinking of is, if you want control, if I could wave a wand, here I have a wand right here, I'll use this end so it really won't happen. This is the magic end. You now have control of all of your bodily functions. Okay, start digesting your food. And send just the right amount of acid. And control your blood sugar, control your, you could go on and on and on. I'm not a physical therapist. Maybe you could tell me all the things that it's possible to look at and wish you could control. But we can't. If we were put in charge of it, then you could come back and we could have some kind of debate, or you could say, well, I need training. I would need to be trained. So, okay, I lost. Not a good metaphor. It's an idea, it's a suggestion, it's a suggestion that you could see the way in which you distract yourself. You can do it easily if you're sitting very still and endeavoring to just observe what is arising in the mind, or what is arising in any of the six sense fields, including the mind, and what is moving this way, moving that way. Meditation, holding very still, watching what moves, don't meddle with it. Even though you would like to stop thinking that particular thing, or you would like to think more of this other thing, do nothing with it. comes, it comes, it goes back and forth. It has kind of a rhythm to it. So again, the way we train ourselves is to, in any of these practices, is to see the way in which we're functioning in a certain way, see in the way in which we cover things up, see the way in which we fuel certain aspects of our self-centeredness. To just observe it. If you go in too soon and try to correct it, it's like trying to adjust the way cooking something based on a recipe, trying to do that without actually tasting the food, trying to structure this or maybe start a whole new recipe altogether. In other words, working on the formula part of it. I'm not a cook, so maybe that's not a good example. But it's the idea of you need to actually be into the situation and see how, the way in which you're confused. Ego does not want to see that. Ego starts seeing that and it either gets afraid because it can see that, you know, you're about to be exposed for the imposter that you are, that you're really somebody. Causes fear. So we don't really want to see that. So the path is about encouraging you, using the teaching of the Buddha, using dependent origination, using life as suffering that causes desire or lust. The goal is cessation, and the path is discipline, meditation, wisdom, Shila Samadhi, and Prajna. Using a very simple structure, provisional teachings to help you begin to transcend that whole relative situation. Here, in this lifetime, right now, do it right now. Questions?
You say don't look away. How do you don't look away if you don't even know you're looking away to not do it?
You're probably screwed. Paraphrase your question, and then I'll paraphrase my answer.
If the poison is ignorance and you don't even know you're ignoring, how can you become aware of ignorance when the nature of ignorance is not aware?
Watch what moves. And if you watch what moves, you'll see the grasping. That's kind of obvious, but it takes a while. Watch the grasping, watch the rejection. Passion and aggression, very simply put, and there's all kinds of variables in there that are aggressive and all kinds of variables that are passionate and all kinds of variables that are ignoring. So you need to watch, and what you won't see is it's a way of shutting down. It's a way of turning away. It can be this much. We've all been having a conversation with someone, and you're looking at them, they're talking to you, you're endeavoring to listen to them, and you're talking to them, and they don't even have to look away. Just looking in their eyes, you can see that they're no longer here. They've turned away in their mind, and maybe the way they've done that is to distract themselves into a thought. I often say to people, I'm saying to you, if you're having a conversation with someone, before you respond to what they're saying, wait for the period. Wait for the period. When someone's saying something, wait for them to stop talking before you assume you know what they're saying, or you need to start. I get interrupted all the time. I occasionally interrupt people, but that's my job. I get paid a lot of money for that. We won't go there. Just observe. And in a conversation with your friend, your enemy, your mother, your father, children, your coworkers, your boss, your employees, or whatever that may be, anytime someone's talking to you, don't interrupt them. Allow that whole situation to, maybe even to the point where they say, well, if it was a question, or do you understand what I'm saying? And you might say, not really. Could you paraphrase yourself? So by observing what's coming and going, by practicing on the cushion, it may not happen on the cushion. It may be just difficult. It may be boring. It may be any number of things. As I've used an example of a knife blade. A knife blade doesn't really know it's being sharpened. It just knows that something rough is going on. Yes? I'm looking at you. Now I'm looking away. Is it easier to ask a question if I look away? Have some of you noticed that when you ask me a question that sometimes I immediately start looking at everyone else? Why does he do that? What's that about? What's up with that? Go ahead.
Well, now that's my question. What's up with that? Why do you do that?
I asked you if you noticed that. Do you notice that?
Yes.
I didn't notice that I did that. You should point it out next time I do that. I don't know. There's no strategy behind it. I like people, so I'm listening to you, but I'm looking at other people too to see if they're listening to you. It's easier for me to teach if I don't look away from anything. Isn't that the title of the talk? How do you do that? Don't look away from anything. And how do you do that? Don't focus on anything, including your suffering, your pain, your difficulty, your stress. Don't go down there and try to work on that and get that to stop, or find out who caused that so you can clip off their earrings. Go ahead.
So how do you how do you tell the difference between looking away and the natural end of a thought when you're practicing?
I think that's the very last word you said, practice. It's practice. There's not going to be a particular gradation of, I think I'm getting better there. I think I'm getting better. I think I'm getting better at that. Probably not going to get that kind of a credential or that kind of a marker. It won't feel like particularly like progress. Spiritual path doesn't feel like progress. That's the mundane path where you get somewhere and you get a credential and you get ahead and you make money. People like you. Further about that question. It's a good question. Go deeper into the question.
If looking away is sort of a habit and it's difficult to
How do you know
see,
it's a habit? How do you know?
For me
Yeah.
personally, it's because I think I'm always missing something, so I'm looking away.
Are you missing something?
You tell me no.
You're not missing anything. There isn't anything else. But to think you're missing something is a very subtle way of turning away from what was in front of you and interpreting or adding. Has a little bit of aggression, slight bit of aggression against who you are or who you think you are, and a little bit of passion or wanting to have control of it. You're the person who is not getting it. And then a little bit of turning away, which is where you don't see that what is in front of you is a Dharma gate. More? You get to have all three of them.
Is it just a matter of watching that then?
Yeah, it seems to be a matter of just continuing to sit down, hold still, and return to that. And also watch in your act every day. What do you call it? Post meditation. Just observe what's in front of you. If it's a spoon, if it's macaroni and cheese, then don't take more than your share. I mean, just do what you're doing. Look at the colors, the shapes, the textures. Don't add on to it. I'm being so mindful. Don't try to be mindful, please. That's a huge way station. It's like a rest area for ego. Be very mindful. I know when I'm reaching for the stick, and I know where I'm reaching for the coffee. That's not mindfulness. That's what do you call that? Narcissism. The one who is aware. That's why I don't teach mindfulness meditation. Creates too strong of a identity of the meditator who's accomplishing stuff. It doesn't take anything away from people who teach that way. Some people maybe want to teach that way, they should, and they're probably going to have a lot of students. More? Caroline.
Could you please say more about how endeavoring to go through Dharma Gate might be sneaky?
Yeah, because what we have is have a little backpack of strategies. And so we feel it's like Dharma Gate instead of just look at the Dharma Gate. Just looking at a Dharma Gate, it can be very painful and scary and any other emotion that's difficult. But if you try to go through it, you might find you're actually not going through it, you're actually covering it up. You're actually going through your idea of a Dharma Gate. The actual Dharma Gate will open. Just, mm-hmm.
It will open by itself?
That's a way of talking about it, yeah. It doesn't really open by itself. Nothing is by itself. Everything is dependently arisen.
At some point I will have to go through it.
Yes, you're actually in one right now. This is a Dharma Gate. So if this is uncomfortable, then good. He snickered.
Max.
Max, that's right, Max. Is that with an X? Two
Yes,
X's? Two
X.
X's?
That'd be fine. That'd be
Yeah.
kinda cool.
You want to? Okay. Yes, Max.
Yeah, I was interested in what might the difference be between standards and discipline. The background for that question is just forms,
Mhm.
because I can't help but feel that there could be standards, perhaps.
Yeah, they could be standards, but the one who is practicing the forms needs to observe the way they can't quite do it. That's practice. If you come in here and you're the Doan or the Doshi, or you're doing the Han and Bell or any other form in here, you'll notice, especially if you do it hundreds of times, that it's always a little different. It's not exactly that way, or it's not exactly the way you were taught, or it's not, something is missing. Something's always kind of missing there. You're not really present. The forms were good, but then you were in Utah, or so. But there's more to that question if you want to help.
Yeah, I have the discipline to try to sit every morning and every evening, but there's, I guess, is there a risk of that becoming a standard and becoming empty? I guess is just what I had in mind. So
Yeah.
I guess that risk of turning practice into a standard.
There's no risk. It's awareness. Awareness is everything, not what shows up in awareness. Again, awareness is like space. It's not space, but it's like space. And what shows up in it is like stuff. Phenomena, clouds, thoughts, emotions, feelings, stories, memories. Comes up and goes away. Nothing lasts. Anything that shows up is leaving. So the form or the structure is like, it's like creating some kind of a strong metaphor here, but it's like creating a backbone so that your awareness has something to show up around. So we holding the form. If you're really holding the form, you can feel how completely mutable it is. Even though you're coming up, when I come up to this altar, every time I come up here, it's like I've never been here before. Although I know if things are out of place, I adjust them. And it's not that I'm not really like correcting things. On one hand, on the other hand, I'm moving things into the structure or the form that I think is appropriate. Someone out here might think they're being corrected, and that's up to them. So every time you sit, as Suzuki Roshi said back in the 60s, beginner's mind. It's like you've never sat before. Sit down, hold still, watch what you've never seen before. More?
Yeah, would that have to do with, in what was read this morning from the meditation primer, the idea of contrast, that the forms allow you to see contrast more
Yes.
easily?
Exactly, yeah, that's good. Who wrote that? Yeah. Yeah, contrast is a way of seeing difference that we're all addicted to without really knowing, the contrast is there, but not really buying into the goodness of one side as opposed to the badness of the other, right and wrong. Tend to take somewhat of a backseat to that, to use another metaphor, to just seeing the contrast. Eventually your mind, you practice this way enough, eventually there'll be nothing but contrast. Things will show up and go away, and you'll have no idea what they are, who they belong to, or what to do about it. And you can actually function out of your wisdom mind. There's no one here. There's no solid being here. Functioning out of your wisdom mind there's complete fearlessness, complete hopelessness. You can't have fearlessness without hopelessness. If you're full of hope, you're going to get scared at some point. Hope is extra. And don't misunderstand. I'm not saying I can't say I hope Unyo wins the lottery. Do you play the lottery? No. Good. So it's hopeless.
Is there a way to see certain themes that come up in the consciousness as brand new?
As what?
Is there a way to see certain things that come up in the consciousness that appear to be themes as brand new?
Yeah. They're always new. Everything is new. This is new. So I can't remember your name. Michael, that's right. Actually, when I came in and sat the other evening, I looked, you were sitting here facing the wall. I didn't know who you were. I looked. I think it has something to do with your new do. Yeah, I'm looking at it saying, who's that guy? And then you moved a little bit, and then I caught your Roman profile. So if you're not adding anything that arises, if you're not in the process of adding something to protect yourself, or taking something away to judge, or if you're doing no math at all, then whatever shows up is completely unique. It's when we're adding and subtracting and dividing that's when fixation happens. That's when it looks the same, it looks bad all the time, or it looks good all the time, or I want more of this, or I want less of this. It's this dependent origination. It's everywhere. It's happening constantly. There's no solid self. I used to talk, haven't talked about it much lately, and I don't know why, but I talk about ego as being a discontinuous identity. There's an identity there, but it doesn't last very long unless you're trying to support it with an opinion, an idea, by saying, well, I've always felt that way. Well, I don't know. What do you think about what I'm thinking? Well, I think you're making sense to me, Jim. Makes sense. Yeah, well, I thought so too, but sometimes people don't agree with me.
If something shows up that looks like it's shown up before, does that mean we're not looking closely enough at it?
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. Say more.
What else could it be?
I don't know. What do you think?
Is familiarity different from ignorance?
Very good question. It's exactly the same. I like the ruffled brow. It's kind of like, what is that? Yeah. You could say, how so, Sokuzan? How Sokuzan? How Sokuzan so? Reflect on it. How are they different? Because that's how they're the same. You lived in a room that I even named specifically because of you and your particular way of working with your mind. We call it Sandokai, the equality of sameness and difference. And I even painted that invisible ink on your ceiling one day when you weren't in there. Did you ever look at that? Did you see what I wrote on the ceiling? You didn't see it? You probably don't even live in there anymore. Who's in there now? Did you notice that? You probably go to sleep when you lie down. No, I didn't write anything in there. But I might now. It'd be a good thing to do. Further questions? We have time? Yes, sir.
On Friday, Bruce mentioned about effortlessly resting in our own nature. And I'm wondering if just receiving effortless?
Yes. It is. But it might take some time, but you have to just, because if you're picking and choosing, it's not going to be easy. You're going to be liking some stuff and not liking others. So this is why if you can work with a contrast, that allows you, that's an entry to it. At some point, even the contrast, or you're not sure which is black and which is white, and you're not concerned with it anymore because you actually see for yourself that nothing is separate from anything. You're not separate from the Buddhas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, and the 10 Buddhas of the 10 directions and the 3 times are not separate from anyone you meet. Everywhere you look, you see the Buddha. Every sound you hear are the words of the Buddha. And what is the Buddha saying? Not separate, not separate, not separate, not separate, not separate, not separate. It's all over the place. More?
When I am picking and choosing, how can I effortlessly just receive?
Practice. Watch the way you keep shutting down on it. Watch the way you keep looking at something else. Just observing what rotates and changes. Eventually, that which is observing and that which is being observed collapse. This is called subject-object collapse into perception only, which is a basic teaching of Yogacara, teaching consciousness only. But you have to just persist. You have to persist at it, and that's why we come in, sit down, face the wall, hold still, and we persist. And then when we get up off from that, we reflect on that. We study together to use conceptual approaches to help keep that moving, kind of teaching moving even in the conceptual area, as Bruce does when he comes here on Fridays to teach, or when Bill Waldron was here. More?
When I'm just receiving, how do I receive all of the things I'm ignorant of?
Again, I think it's just a matter of being persistent about it. So there's nothing lasts. So if you just hold still and you put all your senses on receive, then that's a start. Then you're receiving how this feels. You're not adding comments on it. You're receiving how thoughts, they come and they go, and they move, and they go this way and that way. They fly up, and they hang around for a while, and they'll go away. The same thing with everything else. Sounds, the sound of my voice is coming, and then it goes. So I think it's just a matter of repetition. As Dogen said in the 13th century, a practice and enlightenment are not two different things. They're not identical, but they're not two different things. Practice realization. So practice. That which realizes that's why sometimes my way of saying it is when you realize what this is, you are grandfathered in, or grandmothered in, or grand zebraed in. You realize it, and you realize you've always known this. You've known it since beginningless time. Therefore, you're completely hopeless. There isn't anything. Why hope if you don't need anything else? What's there to hope for? You're not separate from anything, and you're completely fearless because there's no way that when you find out who you are, that can be destroyed. But you have to see it first. If there's any kind of grasping at a self, or grasping at another, or rejection of another, or rejection of a self, then we're buying into the separation that the whole society and mundane path, spiritual, cultural, ethical, materialism, thinking this is right and this is wrong. We need this and we need to get rid of that. This is look at what Stalin did and to his people in the 1930s, or what Hitler did to people, thinking, some people, he had to preserve the Aryan race and they had to get rid of millions of people. That's quite strange. But it's built on thinking some things are good and some things are bad. So we have to start, as meditators, as practitioners of the Dharma, we have to start here. It's not going to help to take unexamined warfare that you're hiding out from somewhere out into the world and try to join a movement. I'm not saying you couldn't do some of that, but I would keep it to a minimum if you're a meditator. The most, where all the energy needs to go is right on that cushion, or reading Dharma books, Buddha, Dharma Sangha, teacher, teaching, students. Work with those three jewels. They've been around for thousands of years. Is it time to stop? I noticed a yawn. You're not bored, you're just tired, right? Yeah. Okay.
Is there vulnerability left in fearlessness?
Is there what?
Vulnerability left in fearlessness.
Yeah, there's nothing but vulnerability. But there's no one there. So you have, it isn't like you stop having fear. It's not like you stop having hope. It's not like you stop having it. Everything is welcome. Everything comes in. You're no longer someone else who doesn't have this but has that. There isn't anything that you're not receiving or that you're separate from anymore at all. So the vulnerability might show up in a powerful way. It could be threatening in a sense, but there's no one. It's funny at the same time. It'd be humorous because you know there's nothing to be threatened. There isn't anyone. Even if you have very negative feelings, they don't occur to a person. Nothing is coming, as it's said in the Tibet, especially in the Tibetan tradition. Nothing comes from its own side as a self. There's no one doing that. Everything is dependently arisen. Yes.
Earlier you mentioned something feels like it's always missing. What is it that's missing?
There isn't anything missing. You just think there is. You're all completely awake right now. Just stop doing the math. Stop adding, subtracting, dividing, don't do anything else. Just be genuine. Is that it? You have more? You can ask a deeper question around that if you want to go there. It might show up as challenging, or it might show up as like not correct or incorrect, or you might be giving yourself a hard time. It's not about not giving yourself a hard time. It's about seeing that. If you really see it, probably that energy is going to back off, because you can see it's just a bunch of energy going into some kind of difficulty, not necessary to proceed in that area. It comes out of the awareness. I teach out of, I don't know where I don't think this stuff up. I don't even know what to even call this talk until somebody asks me, what's the name of the Dharma talk? And sometimes I don't know what to talk about. Teaching is coming out of just a long time of studying this and practicing and some kind of understanding about it. So either what I'm saying resonates with you on some level and makes some sense and feels like support to your own awareness practice, or it doesn't. I have people come here that I think should stay who have left. I have other people who come here and stay who I think should leave. No, not really. I think that. Everybody should come. Everybody should become a monk. Everybody should live in a monastery, ideally. But that's not going to happen, so I relate to people where they're at. If you want to receive Jukai, I'll help you. If you have any doubts about it, don't do it. Don't receive any vows. If you don't want to meditate, don't meditate. There's no propaganda going on here for meditation. Like I think I said last night or the other night, I was kind of shocked when I heard in 1973 or 4 or something like that, when someone told me through the Dharma gossip grapevine, you know, Rinpoche said, Rinpoche told somebody not to meditate anymore. And I said, really? Don't meditate? Why did he tell him not to meditate? And I think they kind of interpreted this. I think they thought he needed a psychiatrist. So, you know, it's a little bit too crazy to sit down and practice. Yes?
I was reading something this morning about not meditating, you know, and the quote was, be still, be quiet, do nothing. And I'm wondering about going back into effortlessness, how continuously putting effort into this practice leads to effortlessness.
Mm-hmm. So the way I teach it, and you've been listening to me for a while, so you'll probably remember this or recognize, I say the effort is at getting to the cushion. So that's why we need schedules and things to kind of put ourselves on the spot. But once you sit down, then I teach it the same way you said, hold still, be quiet, hold still, and don't do anything. My way of saying watch what moves, which is a way of just saying, keeping it very simple. Whatever's moving is okay, watch it. If your breath, watch your breath for the next 3 years if you want to. Some would call that shamatha. I don't call it shamatha unless you have an instruction to do it. My instruction is watch what moves, and that way you get to work with your own shamatha vipassana orientation, or resting in tranquility and panoramic awareness, as your karma, your causes and conditions bring that about, rather than artificially having to. That's why I don't have people do walking meditation. You're welcome to get up and do walking meditation anytime you want. But to interrupt somebody's sitting arbitrarily, not a good idea. It took several decades for me to realize that, of practicing and doing what I was told. And I'm not disagreeing with that, I'm just not going to do it to people that are students of mine. It's enough of an interruption just to have the Doan hit the bell at the end of 2.5 hours. They probably should just walk out and let you end it. 3 weeks, you're still there. Ribs starting to show. Further questions?
In the morning service, I believe it was said something to the effect of protecting us from dark forces. Mm-hmm. And you said nothing good, nothing bad. Mm-hmm. So what do we need protection from?
Dark forces.
Protection if there's no good and no bad.
Dark forces. I didn't say good and bad. I said dark forces. It's a contrast. There is no good and bad, but there's the qualities of consciousness sometimes gather in a way to be obstructive. There's no good or evil in any of us, or in anyone, anywhere, even terrible dictators. There's no evil there. There's just intense fear that they're covering up with their desire to control as much of anything as they can. They ignore that they're going to die. I mean, people know this intellectually. We hear in the comment, well, we all know we're going to die. You're going to have to die someday. Yeah. So, die now. Not physically, but understand it now. So the dark forces, we're not going to ignore anything. We're going to relate with anything. I sometimes say, don't believe it, don't disbelieve it. And for heaven's sake, for God's sake, for Jesus Christ's sake, I mean, if you need that kind of help, don't look away. How do we do that? Anything that shows up, relate to it. That doesn't mean believe it. Dark forces. I'm not talking about evil. If someone uses the word evil, I'm not going to disagree. I'll wait and see, well, what do they mean by that word as a word? What do they mean by that? And if they start to get off into some kind of horrible polarity, and I have permission from them, which I may or may not, then I might say something about that might be not too helpful to do that. So more about that, it's a good question.
Would you say that not looking away is a form of protecting yourself from dark forces? not being
Oh,
ignorant.
Mike, huh?
Not being ignorant is a form of protection. Is that part of it?
Well, everything is a form of protection. If you use the word protection, something's getting protected. It's just a concept, it's an idea. So, probably. More about that? You're very intellectual, not a problem.
I'm a professor of literature, so.
Professor of literature? Oh, what's your favorite writer?
Oh, I don't know.
Don't have one?
Emily Dickinson.
Oh, I like her. She's dead though. She was a pretty lonely writer, but wrote beautifully. Further question about that, Max? It's a good question.
I could try. Just the idea of it's always the struggle for me between what is there that's bad, what are we doing this practice to try to accomplish and get away from, and I know you're going to say we're not trying to get away from anything.
You don't know what I'm going to say.
I could imagine an answer would be we're not trying to get away from anything.
Don't do that. Let me be the teacher. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to why do we practice?
To see the truth. And you can say, what is the truth? I can tell you conceptually, it's everything is dependently risen. That there's nothing is separate from anything else anywhere. There is no good and evil, fundamentally. There's just wisdom that has been led astray by, excuse me, by hope and fear. Hope for something else and fear that that won't come along. You're welcome. Further questions? Yes?
Stefania from Chicago has a question.
Okay.
She asks, what does it mean to sit arbitrarily?
Define arbitrarily. Somebody define it. Max, arbitrary.
Not relative.
Yeah, not operating out of a particular protocol or
Yeah,
just,
not relative.
so would you call it spontaneously? Or impulsively? What would you say?
Spontaneous to me, it seems to have to do with time and timing, where
Okay.
arbitrary could also be location as well. I'm just thinking.
Arbitrary, yeah. Could do it in Kansas, could do it in Missouri, Arkansas. Could sit under a bridge, could sit on top of a bridge. She defined it. Stefania. That's your little friend, isn't it? Yeah. Go ahead, Stefania.
Her definition is on a whim.
Oh, that's one of those little anti-gravity machines. Whims. Yes, on a whim. I think it's valuable to do that, but I think sitting on a schedule, some kind of a schedule seems to be necessary at first. When you first start practicing, seems to be necessary because from the point of view of my understanding anyway of these teachings, we need to sit a lot more than it looks like we need to sit. You can sit for quite a while and start to feel more relaxed, more present, and all those other fancy words, more in the present moment. It can be said with a very low voice. In the present moment, no longer at war with anyone. So I don't think I need to sit anymore. I think I can just sit more arbitrarily, just kind of when I feel moved to sit. Inspirational sitting, not inspired to sit. If you're going to cut into the raw and rugged edge of passion, aggression, ignorance, and fundamentally cut it off at the past or in some way so that the emotional tsunami that is probably in your future and everyone's future here, we all come into phases and patterns where something comes about, maybe March the 31st of 2028, something uncalled for can come rushing at you, just like weather, the actual weather, personal weather can start coming about. It would be good to have a trained mind when that happens so that you can receive that, with a sense of equanimity. Maybe you have some trepidation or some difficulty around it, but as the Tibetan tradition, this is a meditation is called your preparation for death. It's not meant to be negative. It's just saying at some point the body-mind, your temporary anchor, is going to go back into the elements, and who you actually are is going to be, how would you say that, flapping in the breeze. Further, more serious questions? Oh, that was a good question, actually. Anything else, especially from someone who's not asked a question? Stephanie? Yes.
In no self, in the realization of no self, is there still the apparent contrast?
Yeah. And you could even say that the contrast could be even more intense because you're no longer adding a bunch of interpretations to it. So it's the actual contrast rather than the imputed or imagined or a contrast based on the three poisons. There's the contrast that is just about dependent origination. Paratantra is the Sanskrit for that. What arises is dependent on everything else for its apparent expression, size, shape, color, sound, all of the things that, it's just that when a human being arises, is born, they start to assume some kind of singularity or identity where they can get ahead or fall behind or be better than others. It starts in about, I think nursery school is when it starts to get really, where some children rise to the top as the leaders or the bullies, and some go to the bottom as the person who stays off in the corner. So if you begin to see that there's no solid self in the skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness, as there's no solid being here, there's just form, there's just feeling, there's just concepts, there's just consciousness. They don't get together and form a me feeling. It doesn't mean they're not there, it doesn't mean you don't have feelings, it's just that there's no identity having the feeling. So therefore it doesn't last. You get incredibly mad just because you're no longer concerned about how you show up, how you look to others, because you know others don't see you anyway. All they see is their projections of you. Have you noticed that? People just, no matter who you talk to, you can see that they're talking to their idea of you rather than who you actually are. Sometimes that shows up as you go along with their idea of you rather than your own. You actually believe someone else's judgment or opinion, or else you're threatened by it. So you can't really insult somebody unless they have an assumption of separation of me. I'm me. You can't disrespect me. More?
Yeah, I was going to ask, but you may have answered it already. If that comes with more intensity.
It could. There's no guarantees of anything. It could become more intense. When I say no separation, I'm not saying that if you realize that everything is going to be stuck together like macaroni and cheese. What I am saying is that there's going to be some kind of a contrast going on, and it could be even more extreme. You could see the actual divisions between things rather than the imputed ones or imagined ones. You would see dependent origination, which is what I said earlier. Everything is preaching the Dharma. Everything is saying, if you have ears to hear that, it's saying, not separate. Thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our yellow chant books. I would like to remind everybody about the donation boxes that we have in the hallway. We've appreciated all your donations, your financial support for this year, and hope you can continue on. And if you do want to hear Sokuzan tonight, if you go to Susan Piver, piver.com, there's a place for her, you can register for tonight's talk, the fifth paramita of meditation.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-o-san chi-shi-hu, shi-son-bu-sa-mo-ko-sa, mo-ko-ho-ja-ho-ro-mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.